Hello, everyone. Today we're joined by Dr. Brinda Poojary, who has worked as a research consultant for India Animal Fund and senior specialist for Humane Society International India. She holds a PhD in zoology. Brinda has done exceptional work on the issue of animal testing, and today we are going to talk about that. So I think the best way to kind of start off is just to ask, what is the current state of animal testing around the world and in India more specifically?
Um, I think across the board, animal testing has always been considered as the gold standard. But, and that is the case, right? With respect to most fields of testing and research, a lot of scientists feel that way. But there is also a growing body of researchers who have understood how futile animal testing is. And I think that's where non-animal testing comes into play. And a lot of researchers and a lot of scientists are working on developing more non-animal methodologies for testing because of various different, first and foremost, it's because of the gaping, difference between how human physiology works and how non-human physiology works. So a lot of so scientists are realizing that and not realizing, well, they've already known about that. Now they're starting to work on it and to do to make science better, to simply phrase it. So they're working towards that. Yeah.
Yeah, and when there is this huge difference in human physiology and animal physiology, that might also make animal testing unnecessary in those cases. So, could
Yes.
you kind of walk us through for someone who isn't that doesn't have a science background, what that would actually mean? So, is there any merit in like in testing animals that can help us find out what this might have on humans?
So because of the differences in our genes and the way that our genes interact with each other, um, that because of that, our entire physiology and the way that our body functions is very different compared to um, what we see in non-human animals. So even though in the past it has helped for us to find out, to study more about non-human animals and sort of extrapolate it to humans, it has never been 100% because of the differences between the two species. Even within our own species, even within humans, we are so among humans, I mean, we are so different. Like one person is so different from the other, right? So a drug that may work for me may not work for you. I may have an allergic reaction to something, but you may not have an allergic reaction to the same thing. So within species itself, when we are so different, you can only imagine how different we would be to another species and how differently things would react, or how the metabolism of certain substances, etc., would be. So that's why it's very difficult to extrapolate it to another, to extrapolate the results from non-human animals to humans. And as I said, even though there have been small successes in the past, that doesn't mean that we need to continue doing that, especially when we have cutting edge technology right now, you know. So, does that answer your question, or was there something else over there?
No, it absolutely does. And I think one of the things that I'm kind of interested in is that if it is so difficult to actually extrapolate the results of animal testing to humans, then why has it existed all of these years? And what's the prevalence of animal testing like? Is it rising? Is it decreasing with the new technology?
So previously, I think somewhere around 1930s. Around 1930s, there was a disaster with respect to a certain drug called the sulfanilamide, I guess. And because of that, there were a lot of deaths in the US. I think around 100 or more than 100 people died. And that's when the regulation came into place to mandatorily test everything on animals before it comes into the market. So it was sort of a fear reaction to what has happened. And due to that, that's when animal testing actually started becoming part of the regulations. Now, once it is part of the regulation and once it is being used in a particular way in order to do, so there is safety testing that is done on different products, different chemicals, different drugs. Then there is the R&D work that is being done on animals. And the R&D and everything that for that animals have been used for a very long time. That is not very recent. But and that's also because it is unethical to test on humans. So the next thing that they have instead of testing on a human is a non-human animal. And there are not many strict laws in place for that. It's only in the recent years that has started coming into place with the animal welfare laws in different countries. So I guess that's the reason why it's a very gray area when it comes to animal testing all over the world. And even when it even in certain places like I think in the US, they don't mice are not even counted in the list of animals that are used for testing. So in different places, the even the definition of what I mean, even the kind of ethics with respect to animals differs from one place to the other. So even if we put ethics aside, also the scientific aspect itself is very important with respect to um, why we shouldn't be using animals. Because firstly, it is not scientifically sane to do that. And it is really bad science because this is something that has been done for a very long time. And it was firstly in regulations, it was a very fear-based response. And secondly, we have a lot of evidence that it doesn't really work. You can't really extrapolate. We have, when it comes to uh, testing drugs on animals, a lot of the time these animals are induced with the disease because they don't naturally get the disease that humans get. So mice have been induced with cancer so many times and have been cured of that cancer also with drugs, but the same drugs don't work on us because we are not 70 kg mice, right? So that's why it's we need to move away from that. But yeah, there has been a lot of resistance to it. Firstly, because we are a little resistant to change. And secondly, it's also because policy makers are very risk averse. So something that has been going on for a very long time, changing that and thinking that, oh, if we change this, then what if it affects humans and then it'll be a problem because we haven't tested it on animals. So that is a very big question. That is, they'd rather have test on an animal and have that die rather than the thing coming into the market and having a human die. Even though non-animal methodologies have shown high success rates, also regulators are still a little bit risk averse. When it comes to researchers, I think there there is not much awareness is something that I have noticed with respect to non-animal methodologies. So that is one key factor. Even the infrastructure in order to use or to develop non-animal methodologies is not available everywhere, easily available everywhere. So that is another reason why it is not, currently uh, why people gravitate more towards animal testing.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, especially the risk aversion in politicians
Yeah.
to change something that's so deeply entrenched. I'm kind of curious about why it's mice that's often used in these tests. Are there other animals that are used, and why do we normally have lab rats, basically?
I think it's so mice, if you open any research paper and you see why anyone is using mice, mostly it's because there is ease of access. It's easy to test on multiple generations because the reproductive time is quicker, and also because a lot of the genetic component is similar. So mainly it is that, but there is no real scientific reason as to why it's being used everywhere. Every paper that and it's not just mice. So guinea pigs are used, rabbits are used. For a lot of toxicity studies, they're conducted on dogs. You have to conduct them on dogs. On There are certain that have to be conducted on birds, on non-human primates. Um, and when it comes to veterinary studies, you need to conduct those tests on the animal for whom the drug is being used. So if the drug is for sheep, then you have to conduct them on sheep. If it's for dogs, you have to conduct them on dogs. So, if it's for chicken, then you have to conduct them on chicken. So when it comes to veterinary, there's another aspect of you use the species of animals that it's being used for.
Yeah, and could you also walk us through what animal testing looks like? So you talked about how mice are induced with cancer and then cured of it, but from some of the videos that I think Humane Society International has put up about Ralph, they show that they inject certain chemicals into the eyes of the rat, and they do other things that we're not normally used to, or just are also shocked by. So what does this usually look like for the animal?
So Ralph is a bunny, and that was for the cosmetic testing work that we were doing at HSI, and so that is mostly it's for how cosmetic tests are done on animals, how they are, how the chemical is put into their eye to see if there's any eye irritation or any reaction, and they are not given any medication to cure that. Um, so for cosmetics, even for sunscreen, I think there are certain burn tests that are done. Um, Chemicals are applied on a patch of skin is shaved off, and the chemical is applied there to see how it reacts. And so that's with respect to cosmetics, and with respect to drugs, the drug is tested on the animal to see how the animal reacts. The animal is first induced with the disease, and then the drug is injected to see how the animal responds to it. Then when it comes to vaccines, in order to check whether the vaccine is working, the animal is injected with the virus and then is injected with the vaccine to see if the vaccine works. Um, Sorry, the animal is injected with the vaccine and then with the virus to see if the vaccine works. And then there is a there are two groups. There are a test group, there's a control group. And in the control group, the animal is not given the vaccine at all, and the virus is injected, so that animal still suffers. And there is a point where right now there's something called the humane endpoint, where once you start seeing certain symptoms of the disease, then you euthanize the animal. So that is a very standard practice in the vaccine industry, for regulatory requirements. um then there are toxicity studies, so to test whether with respect to chemicals, and even uh, certain ingredients that are used for things like stationery and crayons and paints and everything. All of these are also tested on animals. So, and then there's the whole research, the basic research area. And in the basic research area, you don't even have to give an account of how many animals you use, because that is something that is, well, to um it's considered that you're doing it for the betterment of humanity, so you're just allowed to use. I mean, there will be a particular number, but then if you're experiments don't work, then you can ask for more. And then so that's for basic research, where you're researching and using animals for that. So these are the various streams where animals are used. And although there is a number right now, I think it's 192.17 million animals that are used worldwide. That is still, that number is still not a solid number, because a lot of countries don't put out the number of animals that they use. Like India doesn't put out the number of animals that we use. And as I said, in the US, they don't consider mice in that number. So because of that, and this number is just based on an estimate of what we assume each country is using. So that's why the number can be way higher. And even for basic research, it can be way higher. And I think you asked me about, is the number increasing or decreasing, right? Uh, according to some recent trends, the number is increasing, because now they are having these um, the mutated mice that they are using. So even though there is an increase in non-animal testing, there's also an increase in animal testing, where they are having these um, mutated versions that are being used right now. So yeah, it is increasing. It's still increasing.
Yeah, and out of all of these different ways in which animal testing is done and used for, what is the most prevalent out of all of them? So is it for the purpose of medicines, or is it cosmetics, or other products that humans use? What's mainly fueling the demand?
Hmm. I think it's all of these areas, except now cosmetic. At least it's, cosmetic testing. At least there are these bans that are being enforced, and in different places. So at least that can be replaced, because firstly, there is an alternative that can be used. There are alternatives that can be used. So there are these skin, uh, artificial skin and in vitro methodologies that can be used. But with respect to drugs, with respect to pharmaceuticals, even medical equipments and chemicals and basic research, vaccines and biologicals, all of these areas, there is still a rise in animal testing. I think it would differ from place to place as to where maximum animals are being used. Because in India, we have a lot of vaccine manufacturers, and somewhere else it could be something else. So, it's not. I don't think there is a. I'm at least I'm not aware of that. I'll have to check. That's a good question. Yeah.
In these alternative methods that you talked about, um, what seems to be the most promising? Are you aware of like computational models that they're starting to use to kind of find out what a certain medicine would do if it were administered? Or is there another method of just like directly going into human trials? So if you had to tell a company to like not do animal testing and do something else, what would you offer as like the alternative?
So there's no one-to-one replacement that you can do. You can't take one alternative and replace animal testing with that one alternative. So there are multiple tools that can be used. So there are certain physical tools that can be used, and then, as you said, there are certain computational tools that can be used. So, with respect to the physical ones, we have a lot of development in the field of in vitro testing and in vitro methodologies. There is also 3D bioprinting, 3D and 4D bioprinting, uh, where you print the tissue or the structure, and either with the particular cells, or you grow the cells on the scaffold, and then you subject it to whatever product you want to test on it and then see how that reacts. Um, there are organ on a chip systems where you mimic the working of the organ or a particular part of the organ on a silicone chip, and then uh, you subject the system to the drug or the chemical or whatever you're testing and see how it reacts. And while you're understanding this, you also use computational models to understand what your readings are. And then once you have a whole data or a whole repository, then you can build computational models with this. So yeah, that is that these are so that's why you need to have an integrated approach in order to understand how something will work or not work for a human. There is also precision medicine that has come. So precision medicine is where you customize the medication for the patient, and then you take the patient's cells and you start testing it on, after growing the cells in vitro and probably even growing it on an organ on a chip, and then you test how a drug may react. So there have to be that's what so you can't replace one with another. You have to have a combination of all of these systems and all of these tools.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that your list is just really large, and that sounds promising. And I really hope that like we will get to that world in which we have these other methods, as you said, working together, being combined so that we can kind of phase out animal testing. I want to now talk about advocacy work in trying to get animal testing to stop. So often, unlike other kinds of animal abuse, like factory farming, animal testing is often so hidden that people don't even know about it happening. And do you think that that might make it a much harder issue to solve compared to other issues that involve animal cruelty?
I think yes, because I have noticed that not a lot of organizations are aware of not a lot of people, in fact, are aware of animal testing. And when we talk about animal testing, because there is a lot of talk about cosmetic testing, that's what people are more aware about. So I think, yes, awareness does play a big role um, in getting through to the masses as to what's happening. And as there is awareness that spreads about animal testing and also about non-animal testing, work towards it, because it's one thing that is absolutely necessary, and that can also completely be like we can see a future without animal testing. There is that future is in sight. And I think if more resources are poured into it, and if more like if people work together, collaborate together and work together and pour in resources that is required, that future can be closer. And I mean that future is something that we can meet quickly rather than later. And um also one more thing that I wanted to say was, oh no, I lost my train of thought. I think I'll have to let me come back to that point that I wanted to make about yes, one more thing that I wanted to say was that animal testing is not just affecting animals, it's also affecting humans. Because while we are spending so much money on testing on these animals and wasting their lives for and not even getting something that is concrete for humans, there's so many human suffering because of that. The drugs and all of these chemicals that come out, and the biological products that come out, they don't completely work 100% on a human. They're not they are, I mean, they can do the best that they can, but it's not the 100% mark that they can live up to when it comes to um, treating humans. So even though animals are suffering, a lot of humans are also suffering because we are not using proper science in order to for human benefit also. So it's something that it's when you look at factory farming, I guess you're looking at these large number of animals that are suffering in cages. But when you're looking at animal testing, you're also looking at the extension of what animal testing does. By extension, it is also harming humans because these drugs that don't completely work. There are okay. Let me give you this example. So aspirin, paracetamol, all of these drugs which are extremely beneficial right now, they came into the market before animal testing was mandatory. If you test them on animals right now, they would never be released into the market because all of these are toxic for rhesus monkeys, for guinea pigs, for dogs. So they would never come into the market. And these are such important drugs, right? They also form the base for other drugs. So similarly, we don't know there may be certain drugs that are failing animal tests and not entering the market, and they could be beneficial for us. So, and then there have been drugs that have passed animal tests but then failed human trials. So it goes both ways. And also simple things like are things that we don't react to. For example, chocolate. Chocolate is not good for dogs. And had chocolate been tested on dogs before bringing it into the market, then we would have never had chocolate. So it's yeah, so that is one major reason why this needs to be focused on and people need to know more about this and why animal testing needs to go away. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that that example is really, really interesting. Like, these are the drugs that we use every day, and to s- to see to like even think of a world where they don't exist is also difficult. And
Yeah.
definitely, I do think there's also that anthropocentric argument about how animal testing can be bad for humans. And this might be a bit of a stretch, but do you think the drug companies themselves try to make drugs that they know will pass the animal tests? And so that means that even if they know that like something could be potentially beneficial to humans, they'd rather manufacture the drug that they know can get through the testing that's done on animals instead. And that might like limit some of the drugs that, potentially could be beneficial for humans.
I I'm not sure. I've never thought about this in this way. I don't think it's because when it comes to releasing a drug into the market, it takes more than 10 years for this. So they have to do 10 years of work in order to reach there. But I have never thought of this angle, so I don't think I can make a comment about this. Yeah,
Yeah, but I think your explanation of how a lot of drugs that are beneficial to humans but aren't to animals don't go through is a very compelling point, I think, in
yeah,
comparison to this, because I think this was how I was thinking about it, for a second, and then we don't know because drug companies could make drugs due to a variety of reasons, and they might still
yeah.
be able to do this. I want to now talk about the research that you've done, and you researched about the bias that's involved in in the scientific public to use animal methods. What are the main reasons that this exists, and isn't it that there isn't quote unquote statistical significance? And what do you think should be done to end that?
So this was actually a study that my colleague Marsha Tranfil had done at HSI, and she, in collaboration with a few other researchers, had done this. And what they saw was that there's a bias in publication with respect to animal testing. So a lot of journals seem to be asking for animal testing in the studies in order to validate the non-animal test that has been done, which is counterproductive and uh, to the work that is being done. So that is something that was noticed, and then while I think while they were interviewing a lot of people, they also came across certain scientists who would just do animal testing for the non-animal methodologies just because they knew that the journal would ask them. And while my colleague was conducting this, it also came to my mind how during my um, PhD days, my PhD guide um, had told me this, that because my thesis was completely, I worked on human sperms, so I was testing the effect of a few factors on different parameters of human male infertility. And I used human sperms for that, and I refused to use any animals. And my PhD guide at one point, she mentioned to me that, why don't you test on animals just to see that your readings are matching? Because during your defense, you may be asked why you've not used animals and why, uh, how can you be so sure about your results? Which at that time I had already made up my mind to not use animals for my studies, and I very vehemently stood by my decision, and I said that if you want me to test on animals, I'll just quit my PhD. For which To which he said, okay, fine, then let it be. But I remember this, and I remember that this is what she had told me, and I know that, it didn't strike me at that time till this study was being done by my colleague and I, and we got to know that this is a widespread issue where a lot of publication houses, they do tend to ask for animal studies. And there are a variety of reasons for that. One is the lack of awareness. One is um, I think the incentives for a lot of I think there's very less incentives also to do non-animal testing and to work on non-animal methodologies. So because of that, also there is a lot of lack of awareness also with respect to that. Yeah, that's
Yeah.
what it is. And the we while just before I quit HSI, I was part of a working group that was working towards how to handle this and how to work towards having better practices when it comes to journal publications. And they're still working on that. So let's see how that turns out. I'm excited to see how that work turns out.
Yeah, and that's a very inspiring story, right? To just stand by animals, even in those kinds of
Yeah,
situations. Um,
thanks.
yeah, one more question on just advocacy. So, do we need to say that banning is the only solution? Because often what we do is we kind of compromise and we're like, we don't know if we're ever going to get bans, but at least we could ask for minimum regulations. And what do you think? Should we be asking for bans on animal testing, or should we regulate it? And if we're going to regulate it, what should these regulations look like?
So we can't really ask for bans. Like the cosmetic testing ban is only possible because there are alternatives in place. And because these places are making sure that the infrastructure is available uh, in order to use those alternatives. So we can't really ban animal testing when we don't have something in place. So I think it's very important to work on both, on the regulatory aspect and on the research aspect and the development aspect also, where simultaneously as um, there are more and more, as non-animal methodologies are developed, we also work with the regulators in order to take up these non-animal methodologies as part of regulatory toxicology testing. And then slowly start phasing out animal testing. So that is what has been happening for certain tests also in different areas, like in the pharmaceutical industry, in the vaccine industry, etc. That is the way that a lot of organizations take, because you can't because at the end of the day, it's not, it comes to health, right? It comes to health, and it won't be so easy to just convince regulators to get rid of something and replace it with something. So it is it's kind of a long process, but it could be made smoother if there was more collaboration and there was more dialogue between each sector, with the regulatory, the industry, and the research. So that is something that is much needed right now.
Yeah, and I think that at least with cosmetics, there's also a market for cruelty-free products, and I'm not sure how large that market is, but I think I just don't see like drugs being labeled as cruelty-free, and I don't think they would want to say that they haven't tested this on animals before either, and so I think that might mean that at least working within the cosmetics industry seems more tractable than like, working in some of these other places as you kind of hinted at.
No,
But
so
yeah.
with it's in addition. So this is not what's happening with the cosmetics is something that is still, that is like that the success of that is something that we've seen, and now it's easier to do that. But when I said with respect to regulators and working with regulators, that is with respect to the other
Okay.
industries. So that is with respect to drugs and pharmaceuticals, vaccines, biologicals, toxicity, and chemicals. So with that, it is ongoing, where we constantly work with the regulators to take up tests where there is an alternative and where animal testing can be done away with, and then slowly phase out animal testing. But at least with cosmetics, we already have something in place, so it's easier to ban animal testing there. So you don't need
Mm.
to phase out. Yeah.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And we've discussed a lot about animal testing, and I think it's time to now talk a little bit about you and what got you started. So my first question is, why animal welfare? What made you want to work in this space?
Okay, so a very interesting story is that I got into biology because I like dissecting animals and I was excited to cut up animals when I was a child. And I looked forward to higher education to take up biology, because we at that time dissection was not banned. So we still had dissection. So I was very excited about that. And I used to be a meat eater. So when I was a child, my mom used to buy fish home, and she used to cut up the fish and clean the organs and everything in front of me. So she would show me the heart and she would show me the gills and everything. And I used to be very fascinated by that. So I always wanted to take up biology some point, and I used to love my dissection kit. But during my undergrad, I think during my third year or the second year, I don't know, we brought one of our professors brought two mice to the lab, and she told us to take care of them. So we named one of them Anu and another one Roxy, and we would take care of them and we would feed them, and we became a little bit close to them because every day we would check up on them. And then one day, one of them was missing, and then we asked our professor that, one's missing, what happened? And she said, "Oh yeah, I used that one for demonstration for your seniors." And that sort of hit, that we felt a little bit of a pinch. But then the day after that, she said that now we are going to use the other one for demonstration for your class. And while she was cutting up the mouse, she had given it anesthesia. And when she was cutting it up, it moved because the anesthesia was not enough. And also, we saw her cut up the mouse in front of, like, she was cutting it up, she was showing. And for what? It was just for demonstration, just to demonstrate what the ovaries looked like or something like that. So someone who was an individual who we had named, who we got so close to, was then killed just for something that could have been shown through diagram or through some computer program also. And we cried that day. We cried a lot that day because of this. And that's when it hit me how pathetic this whole system was. And then from there, that's when I decided that I'm never going to use animals for any of my studies. Then fast forward to my PhD, I was working as an embryologist at that time at an IVF clinic, and I wanted to do my PhD on human male infertility. And my PhD instructor, she wanted me to work on mice, but I said that I have access to waste human sperms that are going to just be thrown away. So I can just use those. And I don't even, because it's waste, I don't really need any kind of it's the even when it came to the ethical permissions and all, because it was waste. I was told that I did not need it. Um, so yeah, so that's why started I started my work doing that. And as I told you, my guide in between, she wanted me to work on animals. Again, there I put my foot down. And during this time, at one point, I turned vegan. And I was vegetarian for 4 years before that because I was very attached to my dog in my native place, and she used to be tied here all the time. And every time that I would see her, I would want to set her free, and every time I would come here, I would set her free. And once I just made the connection. I thought that, oh, what's the difference between my dog who is tied here and the animals in the butcher's shop. And I stopped eating terrestrial animals, and then I stopped eating sea animals. So I was vegetarian for a few years. And then while I was doing my PhD, I turned vegan. I watched Earthlings and I turned vegan. And that's when I started doing animal rights advocacy, and I started doing street activism and street outreach. And I had co-founded a group in Bombay called Mumbai Animal Liberation League, and we used to conduct a lot of small events and outreach programs, etc. And I used to do this only on Sundays because that was the only time when I was free. So that's when I decided that once I'm done with my PhD, I want to completely shift fields and and go completely into animal rights and animal advocacy. So once I quit my PhD, once I was done with my PhD, not quit my PhD. Once I completed all my experiments, I quit my job. I focused on completing my thesis. And once I was done with my thesis, I had to figure out what field I wanted to take up. And that's when I was thinking about the different aspects of animal welfare and animal advocacy. And I thought about how, with respect to farm animals or with respect to wild animals, it's easier for people to understand and it's easier for people to do something about it. But when it comes to animal testing, not a lot of people talk about it, not a lot of people know about it. I have seen it firsthand. I have seen my own like my own peers who were doing their PhD alongside me were using animals for their experiments. So I've seen all of that, and that was and still is something that's very close to my heart. And I really wanted to use my research background to work on this aspect and to alleviate the suffering of animals in laboratory. And then I found a job at HSI in the research and toxicology department, and that's how it started.
Yeah, I will say that this was by far the most interesting kind of story I've heard, because I've talked to a lot of people, and I think that one of the things that I see in common is that the people who kind of dedicate their lives towards animals have spent time with them firsthand. So either they've grown up around them, or they've had an experience with an animal that made them start to feel bad for them and then want to work on their, welfare. And I think that, as much hate pets get, I think like pets, I mean, barring the pet mill industry, has really, at least I think, made people more empathetic and caring for animals, I feel. And I think just having more people be around animals to understand them might also help, change their attitudes and perspectives about them. But yeah, that was a
That's true.
very,
Yeah,
very interesting story. I
thank
guess
you.
my next question is, what is the big challenge in working in the field of, welfare biology when it comes to uh, intoxication studies and stuff like that?
Hmm. I haven't really done any hands-on work with respect to that. So I don't think I'll be the right person to answer that question. I'm so sorry.
Oh, no worries.
Yeah. But that's I would like to know though. It
Mm.
yeah, I would like to know about it. So I'll definitely read about it and get back to you on that.
Yeah, and like you have been an advocate for, several years in this movement. And what was the most difficult part of it?
Hmm. I think at different phases, different things have been difficult. So in the initial phase when I was doing it just as a voluntary in my voluntary capacity and voluntary in a volunteer's capacity. That time it was more about reaching out to the public and trying to convince them about why they need to go plant-based and the effects of factory farming, the effects of animal agriculture. So it was difficult reaching out to the public and trying to communicate it with them. Then once I moved on to working professionally, I was interacting more with researchers, more with regulators, and the industry. So it was easier to talk to industry about it because industry really does not want to work on animals. It's an added expenditure, and it's just they are not very much in most of the industry. Stakeholders that we knew were not very much in favor of animal testing. They were just doing it because regulation requires it. But it was difficult to get through to the regulators. For example, there was some regulators who were very, very open. The Indian Pharmacopoeia Commission is one such regulatory body. They are very progressive and very open to change, and they want to make sure that in the industry is able to get what it wants to get. So it was much easier working with them and with the industry. Then there are certain researchers also who are extremely progressive, so it was easy working with them. But then again, there's on the other hand, there are a few others who can be quite resistant to change. So then that was a different level of difficulty that we faced. Another thing that I would like to mention is that when you keep seeing all of these and when you're in that, it kind of also affects you mentally because you're constantly looking at abuse. You're constantly you are aware of what the tests that I described to you. It's difficult to read those papers, and it's difficult to go about your day as if nothing has happened and as if you've not known as if you've not gotten a piece of information that is heart-wrenching. So I think on a personal level, that is a very big difficulty that at least I have faced. And I know that a lot of my peers also, a lot of my colleagues who work in animal testing, for against animal testing and other animal welfare uh, streams. I think you At one point, it feels like you have to numb a part of yourself in order to continue working. But then that once you numb something, then it comes with full force after some time. So yeah, so burnouts are another um
Mhm.
what do I call it? Stumbling block, I guess, when it comes to working for animal welfare.
Yeah, and I think there is something called compassion fatigue where we
Yes.
work on this issue for so long
Yeah.
and then it just it's hard to keep going. And I was actually talking to Aditya, SK Aditya from Animal Ethics about this, and
Yeah,
really liked some of the things that he said about taking breaks,
yeah,
kind of having mental health support in the organizations that people come to volunteer for, meeting with each other to discuss these issues and being open about them, I think are good
mm,
starting points. But again, I think it's very difficult, especially because of just how cruel, some of the things that animals go through are, and to kind of have to like deal with that every day is definitely challenging.
yeah, yeah.
Um, I guess my next question is, do you have any advice for people who want to work in animal testing? Because I'm sure there are a lot of people who are very passionate about the issue and they're not really sure what to do or what to expect.
Yeah, I think it's based on where they are geographically. Find out which organizations work for against animal testing. See in what capacity you're able to contribute. If it is monetarily, then see if you can contribute monetarily. If you are a scientist and um, you're working in a wet lab, then see how you can incorporate certain non-animal methodologies. Or if you're a student, then and if you're a biology student, then see if you can form a sort of a committee or a sort of a group in your uh, educational institution to spread awareness about this, to learn more about what is out there. um, if you are in a position where you are able to review any of the guidelines or the drafts that the government puts out, and if you can send some of your comments uh, for any of these draft guidelines with respect to certain um, testing or that is being done, like regulations around um, chemicals, which where that animal testing is going to be conducted. If you are able to, because these are all public documents, and you can review them, and you can send anyone and everyone can send their review to to the regulatory body. So if you're able to do that, then you can do that. Um, if there's any way in which you can collaborate with scientists and bring out more papers on non-animal methodologies and or the downside of animal testing, then that would be great. Uh, what else? I think be creative on how you can spread awareness about it, how you can learn more about it if you have access to information, and how you can spread the word so that everyone else knows about it too.
Yeah, this is really good advice. And I guess we've, talked a lot for the past hour about,
Also,
oh yeah, go ahead.
uh, sorry, if you're a funding body, or if you have any kind of influence on a funding body, then see if you can increase the funding into the development of non-animal methodologies, because that is very, very, very important right now. Funding plays a huge role in promoting non-animal methodologies, so in the
Yeah.
promotion and the uptake. Yeah.
Yeah, I was just gonna say that we talked a lot about animal testing, and we covered a lot of content in the past 1 hour. And so I just wanted to ask,
Was it one
is
hour already? Wow.
yes, um, I wanted to ask, is there
Yeah.
any question you wish you were asked, anything that we haven't covered yet that you wanted to like properly mention?
Mm, I can't think of anything. I think you've covered everything. Can't really think of anything right now. Yeah, can't think of anything right now.
Okay, no worries. Thank you so much, Dr. Brinda, for coming on and just talking to us a lot about just animal testing. I will certainly say I learned a lot about it. And, it's something that I definitely think is neglected, but also an issue that can be solved readily. And
Yeah,
we just don't have enough, money going into finding some of these new methods. We don't have, people putting this as like an issue that they actually can reasonably work on because there are other issues as well. And I think it's just so important that whenever we have needless suffering, that's the thing that we can get out of the way before we do anything
yeah,
else.
yeah,
So I definitely will say that this was a very, very enjoyable hour. Not because we talked a lot about the suffering of animals, but because I think I'm definitely hopeful that we will be able to make progress in this space. So thank you so much for all that you do for animals. Your story is very inspiring, and yeah, it's been a genuine honor hosting you.
thank you so much too, and I really like the way you summarized everything so well. So thanks so much for doing this, and I look forward to any kind of questions that the viewers or the listeners may have. And I enjoyed talking to you about this. I can go on and on about it. So I didn't even realize it's been an hour. So thanks so much for this.
Yeah,
You were very
absolutely.
thorough. Thank you
Thank
for
you so
that
much.
too.
And if you don't mind, is it fine if I put your email on the blog article in case anyone has like any questions?
Sure, sure, sure. Yeah.
Okay, amazing. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye.